The slap of porcelain against tile echoed through the quiet diner like a gunshot, and for a heartbeat, no one moved. Coffee spilled across the checkered floor, steam rising in fragile curls, while an elderly woman with trembling hands tried to steady herself against the edge of a red vinyl booth. Outside the wide glass windows, snow-dusted mountains stood silent and indifferent. Inside, humiliation hung thick in the air. A large man loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her frail frame, his voice low and cruel as he demanded what she could not give. It was the kind of moment people look away from. The kind that defines who we are. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because they remind us who we can choose to be. Her name was Margaret Hayes, though most people in town simply called her Mrs. Hayes. She had lived in that mountain town for nearly 50 years. She had once been the wife of a mechanic, the mother of a single, bright-eyed boy, and the owner of laughter that filled rooms. But life had a way of stripping things away. First her husband to a roadside accident on an icy morning. Then her home to medical bills. And finally, her son to something she never fully understood but always believed was necessary. Service. Duty. A calling bigger than herself. For years, Margaret worked double shifts at the diner, refilling coffee mugs and memorizing regulars' orders. She saved every extra dollar in a small tin box beneath her bed. When her son left for the Navy, she smiled bravely at the bus station, her hands clutching his face as if memorizing it. She had told him to be strong. He had told her he would come back. But the town had changed. Factories closed. Jobs vanished. And kindness became scarce. Margaret's savings dwindled when her rent increased. Her arthritis worsened, forcing her to move slower, dropping plates she once balanced with ease. The diner owner kept her out of loyalty, though customers whispered that she was too old, too fragile. The man standing over her now was named Carl Benson. He had moved to town 2 years ago and purchased several properties, including the small apartment building where Margaret lived. He was known for his sharp suits, louder temper, and a habit of squeezing every last dollar from those with the least to spare. Margaret was 3 months behind on rent. Her social security check barely covered food and medication. She had asked for more time. He had given her threats instead. That morning, Carl had decided to make a point. He had followed her to the diner after she failed to answer his calls. He stood in the narrow space between tables, his thick boots planted firmly on the black and white floor, accusing her of lying, of manipulating sympathy. Customers shifted uncomfortably but stayed seated. No one wanted trouble. Margaret tried to explain that her son used to help, that he sent money when he could, but she had not heard from him in months. She kept her chin lifted despite the tremor in her hands. When Carl slammed his palm on the table, her cup tipped over. The crash was what drew every eye. And then the bell above the diner door chimed. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in camouflage fatigues that seemed out of place among red booths and chrome countertops. His posture was straight, his movements deliberate. At his side walked a black German shepherd, alert and disciplined, eyes scanning the room. Conversations hushed instantly. The soldier's gaze locked onto the scene within seconds. He took in Carl's stance, Margaret's pale face, the spilled coffee. There was something about the way his jaw tightened, something controlled yet simmering beneath the surface. Margaret did not recognize him at first. How could she? The boy she remembered had soft features and nervous excitement. The man standing there had lines carved by hardship, shoulders broadened by training, eyes that had seen more than she ever wanted to imagine. But when he took a single step forward, her breath caught. Carl turned, annoyed by the interruption. He muttered something about minding one's own business. The soldier did not raise his voice. He did not puff his chest. He simply placed a steady hand on Carl's shoulder and moved it away from Margaret with calm authority. The German shepherd remained at his heel, silent but ready. There was a stillness in the soldier's expression that made Carl hesitate. A kind of quiet certainty that did not require shouting. Customers leaned in, sensing a shift. Carl scoffed, attempting to reclaim dominance, unaware that the ground beneath him had already changed. Margaret finally whispered the name she had not spoken in months. Daniel. The soldier's composure broke for the briefest moment. His eyes softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the deeper wrinkles, the thinner frame. He stepped closer and gently cupped her face with hands that had once held rifles and rescued strangers in foreign deserts. And in a voice thick with emotion he had buried for years, he called her Mom. The word hit the room like thunder. Carl's confidence drained as realization dawned. This was no random passerby. This was a Navy SEAL, home from missions that demanded everything from a person. A man trained to endure pain, to protect, to confront danger without flinching. And he was looking at Margaret not as a helpless widow, but as the woman who had shaped him. Daniel had not written because his missions were classified. He had not called because communication was limited. But he had sent money anonymously when he could, unaware it never reached her due to a clerical error at the bank. When his last operation ended and he was granted leave, he came home unannounced, eager to surprise her. Instead, he walked into a scene that would change more than one life. Carl tried to stammer an excuse, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But Daniel's silence was more powerful than any threat. He calmly requested to see the lease agreement. He asked about overdue notices. His questions were precise, controlled. The kind that made lies unravel quickly. Other customers, emboldened now, began to speak up. They described the rent hikes, the ignored repair requests, the intimidation. For the first time, Carl found himself surrounded not by fear, but by witnesses. Margaret reached for Daniel's arm, as if to steady herself in a dream. Tears streamed down her face, not from humiliation now, but from relief. She had spent so long carrying burdens alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to be defended. Daniel did not escalate. He did not threaten violence. Instead, he promised something far more devastating to a man like Carl. Accountability. He mentioned legal counsel. He mentioned veterans assistance programs. He mentioned reporters who loved stories about predatory landlords targeting elderly widows of veterans. Within weeks, investigations began. Carl's business practices came under scrutiny. Tenants organized. Repairs were demanded. Rent adjustments were negotiated. Carl's empire of quiet exploitation began to crumble under the weight of truth. Daniel moved Margaret into a small cottage near the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees and morning light. It was modest, but it was safe. He repaired the porch himself, hands more accustomed to combat than carpentry but guided by love. The German shepherd, whose name was Valor, became Margaret's constant companion when Daniel returned to duty. The town changed too. The diner customers who once avoided eye contact now greeted Margaret warmly. They had witnessed courage in its purest form. Not just Daniel's, but hers. The courage to endure without bitterness. The courage to raise a son who would grow into someone who protected others, even when the world seemed unkind. Margaret often sat on her new porch, wrapped in a knitted blanket, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. She would think about the moment in the diner, about how close she had come to losing hope. She realized that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet persistence of a widow working double shifts. Sometimes it is the disciplined restraint of a soldier choosing justice over rage. And sometimes, it is a community deciding that enough is enough. Before we reach the end, I want to ask you something special. Please comment the word hope if you believe that no act of kindness is ever wasted. Let it be a small promise to stand up for someone when they need it most. Daniel's leave ended too soon, as it always did. On his final morning, he stood beside Margaret's rocking chair, sunlight catching the edges of his uniform. He knelt, resting his forehead against hers like he used to as a boy. She told him she was proud. He told her he carried her strength into every mission. When he left, Margaret did not feel abandoned. She felt empowered. Because she knew now that she was not invisible. That her life had mattered enough to shape a protector. That even in her frailty, she had been someone's foundation. Carl eventually sold his remaining properties and left town quietly. No dramatic exit. No applause. Just consequences catching up. Years later, people would still tell the story of the day a Navy SEAL walked into a diner and called a trembling widow mom. But those who understood it best knew the real story was not about intimidation or power. It was about recognition. About seeing the value in someone the world had dismissed. Margaret kept Daniel's childhood photos on her mantle, alongside a folded flag from his first deployment and a framed picture of valor sitting proudly at attention. She volunteered at the local community center, helping other elderly residents navigate paperwork and benefits. She became an advocate, using her experience to prevent others from suffering in silence. The diner remained a gathering place, but it felt different now. Warmer. Braver. Customers remembered that ordinary moments can become turning points. That a single word spoken with love can dismantle cruelty. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone strong in your life, please like the video, share it, and subscribe. Leave a comment telling us who your hero is. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who might need a reminder that they are not alone. On quiet evenings, when the wind rustled through the pines, Margaret would close her eyes and whisper a prayer for her son's safety. She no longer feared the future the way she once had. Because she had seen what love forged in hardship could become. He thought she was just a helpless widow. Until the Navy SEAL called her mom. And in that single word, the world was reminded that the strongest foundations are often built by the quietest hands.